Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. In a world full of unexpected twists, life's paths can change direction without notice. Sometimes the choices we make in haste can send ripples beyond our lives, touching others in ways we could never have predicted. For many, it's these unintended consequences that shape the future. 5 years ago, a seemingly simple decision set everything in motion. Choosing to cut across the countryside, instead of sticking to the usual route, became a detour that would change one man's life forever. He couldn't have imagined how this decision would unravel the comfortable facade of his world, revealing hidden truths beneath the surface. It all started 5 years ago with a chance encounter. I stumbled upon a village we called Circumstances, a place with no formal recognition, but home to 349 people. Luck was on my side. I had just finished unloading a trailer of medical supplies in Texas that needed sterilization before hitting the shelves. After confirming everything was clean, the dispatcher gave me an early assignment, which allowed me to get home 2 days sooner than planned. With my license for handling hazardous materials, I was one of the few qualified for the job. The pickup location was just 30 minutes away, so I refueled and headed out. Once the load was secured, I was back on the road. The drop-off point was only an hour from home. I was already driving when I confirmed the load was complete and realized I'd been paid double for this shipment. Instead of taking the planned route, I opted for a shortcut across the country, cutting both miles and time. Now, I was less than 2 hours from home, running 5 or 6 hours ahead of schedule. I had stopped at the intersection of 2 rural roads when I saw a handwritten sign reading, "For sale before county takes." An arrow pointed right, so I followed it. A few more signs led me to a farm owned by an elderly couple, likely in their late 70s. They had retired but were behind on taxes due to rising prices. They loved their farm and weren't ready to sell and move to town, so they decided to sell part of their land. I called my father, who used our family trust to buy the farm at market value. We let the couple rent the house long-term at a low rate, which thrilled them. They even said, "If you ever need a favor, let us know." I had my father divide 10 acres at the crossroads from the original 200-acre farm. It was the perfect spot for a store and gas station since the nearest city was an hour away. I suggested my father buy the surrounding land at the intersection as cheaply as possible. He did, and we ended up owning 10 acres on each corner of the crossroads. While searching for water, my father found an underground river capable of providing water to 50,000 people. He decided to tap into it for our new commercial venture. Just as I pulled up to the house to make a reservation, the dispatcher called with another job, which I gladly accepted. I ended up getting home at the usual time. 6 months later, I dropped off my load at 5 in the morning on a Wednesday, 12 hours before the workday started, and parked my truck and trailer at the company yard. I took the keys to my freshly painted old Ford to the dispatch office, knowing I might face penalties for violating driving hour regulations. I had been on the road for 16 days, eager to get home. The driver replacing me got 2 extra days off. The truck was scheduled for inspection and would be ready in a few hours. The dispatcher informed the next driver, who was scheduled to hit the road by 9 o'clock. I told my wife I'd be home for dinner. Marcy had taken the kids and was excited to see me. I had recently pulled the engine from my old Ford truck, as it was dead, and spent my free time restoring the frame and body since the interior was still in good shape. Before my last 2-week run, I paid a local shop to repaint all the metal parts. Once the shop was done, they called Jameson's Auto to pick it up. After installing the new engine and checking everything, Jameson's left the keys with the dispatcher, knowing I'd grab them when I got home. After the paint job, the old truck looked brand new. The red truck had turned completely black, with chrome bumpers and Ford painted in white on the back door, just like the original. I could even get collector plates if I wanted. Coming home 10 hours early, I thought it would be a nice surprise for my wife. Since she didn't start work until 9, I started the car and headed home. After 16 days on the road, I couldn't wait to see my wife and our 2 daughters. It was around 8 when I drove down our street, only to find a car in the driveway that didn't belong there. I immediately knew whose car it was. It was the pride and joy of the youngest son of the owner of our transportation company. When I was on the road, he was off, as we shared the same cab. In many ways, we couldn't have been more different. He was known as the black sheep of the family. Most truckers thought of him as a guy with a big mouth. I pulled over and watched him. I needed to know why he was in front of my house and where my wife's car was. My heart broke when I saw my wife, Marcy, and Jack Redding, along with our 2 kids, coming out of the house. In his right hand was the bag that we drivers always carried with us, filled with all the essentials for the road. The girls had missed the bus to school, so they were taking them. I recorded them with my cell phone. I captured Marcy and Jack sharing a loving hug behind the kids before loading them into the car. It was clear this had been going on for quite a while. Neither of them seemed to care about being seen in public. They looked just like a happy family. They drove by without noticing me. My wife no longer recognized my restored truck, and since I wasn't going home, she didn't look for me. I watched them in the rearview mirror as they turned the corner. Then I pulled up to our 3-bedroom house to see what else I could find. The kids' bedrooms were just as they always had been. So was our bedroom. My wife's clothes were in their usual spots, as were mine. Even the bed was made, which was odd since the kids had missed the bus. Nothing seemed out of place. If they had stayed the night together, where was the evidence that could prove it? I was now certain that if they weren't involved, Jack had no reason to be there. I looked around twice, but my gut told me to keep searching. There wasn't anything unusual from the upstairs basement. The dishwasher was full of dirty dishes. Then I noticed a light under the door to the unfinished 3rd floor, which made me laugh. It shouldn't have been on. We had hung old curtains and kept them closed, using the space as an attic. I hadn't been up there in years. My first thought was that Marcy had forgotten to turn off the light. Curiosity got the best of me, and I needed to know why there was light under the door. As I climbed the stairs and opened the door, I was shocked to find that the entire floor was completely finished. The light came from a curtain someone had left open, which had always been closed when I was home. The strange part was that we could never even start the renovation because Marcy and I couldn't agree on how to use the space. Now I knew why. Why was this room done, and who was using it? It had its own bedroom, bigger than ours downstairs, with huge walk-in closets, a master bathroom, and a sitting area with its own TV and DVD player. On a small table were movies my wife would never watch or let me watch. When I turned on the TV and hit play on the DVD remote, a video started. I was stunned to see my wife with another man. Across the room on the coffee table was a handmade card that read, "We love you, Uncle Jake," signed by my 2 kids. My worst fear had come true. Not only was he her lover, but he was trying to take my kids and my family away from me. The bed was unmade, and there was a new set of dolls on the floor, meaning she had rushed out this morning. Looking through the closets, I found clothes that must have been his, as they were way too big for me. The other side had women's clothes I recognized as hers, including sensual evening gowns she had never worn for me. I had no doubt now. Marcy and Jack were lovers, and I began to realize there was a side to her I had never seen. It was clear that to her, I had always been her second choice. What did my children know about this? I used my cell phone to record everything I found. I even took a picture of myself in his shirt, proving it was too big for me. I noticed a framed photo of him with his parents. I documented every detail. Then I stopped and saved the recording. I rewound the DVD and captured a frame that clearly showed Jack Redding, my boss's son. This was the second piece of evidence I saved. Heading down to the basement, I grabbed our 3-person luggage and began packing all my clothes. Eventually, I returned to the 3rd floor to retrieve the disc with the recorded video of them. I packed it in one of the suitcases. Once I was done, I set the bags by the front door, planning to come back for them later. There were a few more pressing matters to address. I called my father and asked, "How soon can we open the new store?" He replied, We're already building it with a second floor for a 2-bedroom apartment. I'm searching for a regional manager to oversee things. The chain franchised us, which is a big help. It'll take another month and a half to finish construction, plus another month to get everything up and running. Why? He asked. I explained everything and added, I'll live in the apartment and run the store. Get me a good civil and divorce lawyer. I said I'd fill him in on the details later and ended the call. Then I called the farmer we bought the land from and asked if I could rent a room until the construction was finished. He chuckled and said, Your money's no good here. You and your family did us a great favor when we needed it most. Stay as long as you need. I insisted on paying, but he refused. No way, he said firmly. We owe you. Just come by, and we'll figure the rest out. I agreed to meet him the next morning at 10 and thanked him for his kindness. Next, I drove to the transportation center and went straight to my boss's office. As soon as I walked in, I said, I'm quitting, effective immediately. My boss, Jace Redding, looked confused and asked, What? Why? You've always been one of our most reliable drivers. I didn't want to go into details, but I knew I had to. I pulled out my phone and showed him the video I took on the 3rd floor of my house. Jace went pale. Where is this? He asked. That's my house. That's the 3rd floor that wasn't supposed to be finished, I replied, my voice trembling. I watched as disbelief and anger warred on his face. What the hell is this? He muttered, staring at the screen. I hit play again, and this time the video showed his son, Jack Redding, with Marcy. Jace, a devout Christian, sat there, stunned. When the video ended, he put his head in his hands and muttered, My God, that's disgusting. I cleared my throat and said, The woman in the video is Marcy, my wife. That's why I'm quitting because of what your son did. For a moment, Jace didn't speak. Then he looked up at me, his face full of regret. I had no idea, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Heath. I had no idea my son could do this. He paused, at a loss for words, then said, I'll have the accountant cut you a final check, and I'll add $10,000 as a bonus. Please don't tell anyone about this. Let me handle it. I nodded, but before I could leave, Jace asked, Are the children his? The question took me by surprise. They look like Marcy, but I don't think so. I doubt the affair has been going on that long, I replied softly, but you could ask Jack to take a DNA test. Jace looked devastated and said, I will. Please just don't say anything until I talk to him. He's my son, but I don't condone what he did. I don't know what to do. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Finally, I nodded and said, I'm sorry too, but I have to go. I need to get custody of my daughters. That's my priority. As I turned to leave, Jace called after me. When Jack gets back in 2 weeks, he's gone. I've heard rumors about his affairs, but I never had proof until now. I never thought it would be with one of my employees' wives. I left Jace's office with a heavy heart, feeling a mix of relief and anger. The whole situation had spiraled out of control so fast, and I knew there was still so much more to handle. Despite wanting to escape it all, I knew I had to face what was coming. After cashing my check, emptying our joint accounts, and paying the bill at Jameson's Auto, I drove to my daughter's elementary school. I asked to speak with the school counselor, Miss Connors. After explaining the situation, she agreed to bring my daughters out of class so we could talk. When they saw me, their faces lit up with excitement, but their joy quickly faded when they noticed how serious I was. I began, Girls, I need to talk to you about something important. They looked at me, confused. Miss Connors was about to leave, but I stopped her. It's best if you stayed, I said. I don't want anyone thinking I'm manipulating this. Linda, my eldest, asked first, What's going on, Dad? Taking a deep breath, I said, I want to know who Uncle Jack is and how long he's been staying with you. Linda and Lauren exchanged nervous glances before Linda answered. He's a cousin of Mom's, she said cautiously. He moved back here a few years ago. How long has he been living in our house? I asked. The girls hesitated. He's been renting the upstairs apartment for 3 years, Lauren replied quietly. Mom said it was a surprise for you. We didn't know you didn't know. Their words hit hard. Girls, you need to understand, I said, trying to keep calm. Uncle Jack isn't a cousin. He's been living with your mother because they're having an affair. Linda and Lauren turned pale as the truth settled in. What? Linda whispered. But Mom told us. I shook my head. I'm sorry, but it's true. That's why I'm divorcing her. Miss Connors, who had been quietly watching, stepped forward. Girls, your father is telling the truth. I've seen this before, and I'll be here to help you through it. Lauren began to cry, and Linda hugged her. Watching them try to understand shattered me all over again. Dad, what's going to happen to us? Linda asked, her voice trembling. I knelt down, holding their hands. I'm going to fight for custody, I said. But until I find a new job and get things in order, you'll have to stay with your mom. I'm sorry, but that's how it has to be for now. They nodded, tears streaming down their faces. I kissed them both on the forehead and watched as they returned to class. Miss Connors gave me her number, saying, Have your lawyer call me. I'll testify about today. I thanked her and left the school, overwhelmed with sadness and anger. This wasn't how I imagined my life, but there was no turning back now. On the way home, I stopped at a flower shop and asked for a bouquet of dead flowers. The florist looked at me strangely, so I explained it was a gag gift. She laughed and pulled some wilted stems from the trash. Will these work? She asked. I smiled. Perfect. After they wrapped the flowers, I headed back to the house. I placed the bouquet on the bed along with the card for my daughters that said, We love you, Uncle Jake, and a baby doll I had cut up with Marcy's sewing scissors. Then I loaded my tools onto the truck bed, covering them with a tarp. The tools were worth a small fortune. I tossed the suitcases into the truck and tied everything down securely. As I was finishing up, my neighbor, John Zexsmith, came over and said, I guess you didn't know about Marcy's second husband, huh? I looked at him, confused. Second husband. In a common law marriage, John explained. It's been going on for at least 3 years. We all thought you knew. We assumed you and Jack had some kind of arrangement. My blood ran cold. No, I didn't know, I said softly. I just found out today. We talked a while longer, and John suggested I move my truck to his garage to keep an eye on the house. I agreed, and as night fell, I watched from John's garage as my wife of 13 years pulled into the driveway. She had no idea what was waiting for her inside. Through binoculars, I watched Marcy go straight to the bedroom. She smiled at the bouquet of dead flowers, thinking they were from Jack. But her smile faded when she picked up the card for Uncle Jack and saw the baby doll in pieces on the bed. Her face turned pale as panic set in. She opened the box of dead flowers, and when the smell hit her, she recoiled, looking like she was about to be sick. I could see her trying to make sense of it all, still unaware that I knew everything. Just then, my daughters got off the school bus and walked to the front door. Lauren texted me, Dad, don't answer the phone. We want you to hear what we say to Mom. I explained the situation to John, and we set up the speakerphone so we could listen to the conversation together. The girls went straight to their mother's room, where she was still struggling to understand what I had done. She hadn't yet grasped the meaning behind my actions. After greeting their mother, my daughters began to explain. Dad called us out of class today because he wanted to talk to us alone, Linda started. I could tell by Marcy's expression that she was fully engaged now. We met with the school counselor, Miss Connors. We were confused about why he was there since you told us he'd be home around 6, Lauren added. That's when he asked Miss Connors to stay. The first thing he asked was who Uncle Jack was and how long he's been part of the family, Linda said. I told him you said Jack was a distant cousin who moved back to the area, Linda explained. Fear crossed Marcy's face. Now she understood who had left the message on the bed. Mom, Daddy didn't know you had finished the third floor while he was away. You told us it was a surprise for him, Lauren revealed. We realize now that it wasn't, Linda added. We kept your secret, and it was a surprise for Daddy, Linda said. But he found out today, Lauren added. Mom, you always told us not to lie, but now we realize that lying to the family seems to be okay for you. Tears started streaming down Marcy's face as the truth unfolded. Dad didn't know Uncle Jack had been renting the third floor for over 3 years, Linda stated. We explained to him that you never slept in the bed you and Daddy shared when he was home. It was always made before you left for work, and we knew that wasn't normal, Lauren continued. Marcy's face turned white. Her daughters had unknowingly revealed her secret, and even the smallest detail, like the maid bed, was exposing her. We told Daddy that while we never saw you with Uncle Jack, we often saw you coming downstairs from the third floor in the mornings when he wasn't home, Lauren said. Dad said he's divorcing you because Jack isn't a cousin. He's your lover, Linda added. He also told us that you and Jack have been using him for years to support Jack's lifestyle, and that everything you built was for your needs, not the family's. He said his life with you was a lie, Linda said firmly. Dad said we have to stay with you until he finds a new job because he quit today so he can fight for custody of us, Linda continued. Miss Connors told us Daddy had no choice but to quit since the court wouldn't grant custody to a long-distance truck driver, Linda explained. After that, we went back to class, Linda said softly. Marcy sat on the bed, tears pouring down her face. She knew everything the girls had said was true, and she couldn't deny it. Heath was making the right moves, preparing for the inevitable battle. As a social worker, Marcy knew exactly what the state would be evaluating when the court ordered a family assessment. We ended up breaking down, and the counselor had to take us out of class for the rest of the day, Linda continued quietly. She talked with us for a while to calm us down, Lauren added. We also learned that sleeping with someone else while you're married is called infidelity, Mom, Lauren said bluntly. Miss Connors said it's the biggest betrayal in a marriage, Linda added. You don't seem bothered by it, or we wouldn't be talking about this. Miss Connors also wondered why you thought you could live such a long life with 2 husbands, Lauren said. I don't have 2 husbands, Marcy whispered to herself, as if trying to convince herself. I have one, Heath, and a lover. But that's not how everyone else sees it, Mom, Linda shot back sharply. Heath had decided that his pride wouldn't allow him to do anything but file for divorce. To him, Marcy had used him for years, and his daughters had seen through it. Lauren and I talked about what you did, Mom, Linda said, her voice shaking. We think you must have hated not just Daddy, but us too. That's the only way we can understand why you've been doing this for so long. Miss Connors said that if you loved our father, you never would have done this to him, Lauren added, her voice trembling. Marcy was sobbing uncontrollably now, her body shaking. She had never imagined her daughters would learn the truth this way and confront her so harshly. Before we got on the bus, Miss Connors asked if we were okay, Linda said. She offered to take us home, but I told her we needed time to talk. Miss Connors also said she would testify in court about what she heard today if necessary. She's seen too many families fall apart because of lies, Lauren added. We whispered a lot to each other on the bus ride home, Linda said. We made some decisions. Marcy buried her face in her hands, unable to stop crying. Mom, we're 12 years old, but in a year we'll be old enough to decide who we want to live with, Lauren said firmly. Miss Connors explained that when we turn 13 we can choose. We've decided to live with Dad, Linda said resolutely. We'll call Grandma and ask her to take us in, Lauren continued. I'm sure she and Grandpa will let us stay with them until Dad has everything sorted out. That way, you and Jack can have the house to yourselves, Lauren finished, standing up. Come on, Linda. Let's call Grandma and pack our things, Lauren said, pulling her sister along. Before they left, Linda turned back to her mother with one final question. Mom, are you trying to get us close to Uncle Jack so we'll accept him as your second husband? Linda asked pointedly. Because that's exactly how it feels. Marcy was devastated, unable to respond as her daughters exposed the truth. All she could do was watch as they went downstairs to call their grandmother. Her daughters had inherited their father's clarity. They saw the situation for what it was and made their conclusions without hesitation. I sent Marcy a text. What you found on the bed was my doing. Let your common-law husband know. I'll be suing him for joint custody of you and the children. Through binoculars, I saw the realization hit her, that if I took her lies and secret lifestyle to court, she would lose all rights to our daughters. Marcy understood she was defeated, with no happy ending in sight. If I sued and exposed Jack, it would ruin them both. John, and I timed it. Less than 5 minutes later, my in-laws arrived. John opened the front door so we could hear the conversation. The voices were so loud they sounded like screams. My mother-in-law scolded Marcy as she took the girls out of the house. But it was my father-in-law who put things into perspective. Since you've cut Heath out, once things settle with Jack, you'll be looking for another long-distance driver to replace him, my father-in-law said angrily. Jack has already shown he thinks so little of you that he lets you share yourself with others. Your behavior makes it clear that one man will never be enough for you. John and I could see Marcy was crushed by her father's words, crying so hard she couldn't speak. We'll contact Child Services tomorrow to figure out the next steps, said Marcy's mother. Our granddaughters called us and explained why they wanted to leave. I'm proud of them. Clearly, someone raised them right. And unfortunately, it wasn't you. John closed the door, grabbed a couple of beers, and we sat down in the kitchen. Your daughters see things for what they are. Heath, you should be proud, John said. To be honest, when the construction crew was working, Marcy told us you were renting out the 3rd floor for extra income. I never questioned it because you didn't need the money. I remodeled the house from the 1st floor up. She's been deceiving us from day one. Jack and she planned everything. I explained. So where did the money come from? John asked. We haven't received any rent. My guess is Jack used his trust fund to pay for it, I replied. I took out my phone and sent a text to Marcy. John, let me know when you find Marcy. I have a message I need to send, and I want to know what her response will be. A few minutes later, John said, I found her. She's in the bedroom, and she seems calmer now. I sent the message I had planned. The text read, Hey ho, just a heads up. Jace Redding wants to know if Linda and Lauren are mine or Jack's. He's planning to sue to find out. Oh my God, she's lost it, John said. She threw the phone at the wall. Now she's lying face down on the bed, crying hysterically. John walked back to the kitchen with a smile. What did you say to her? I just asked if Jace and I needed to know if Linda and Lauren were Jack's or mine, I replied. Jace had told me rumors had been circulating for years that his son was having an affair with a married woman, so I asked a question that everyone wants answered. John's face turned pale. He knew Jace's reputation. Jace would go to the Supreme Court if he had to get the truth. After half an hour, I asked John to check on Marcy again. She was sitting on the couch in the living room. I sent her a 5-minute clip of her with Jack taken from the TV. It showed everything, ending with Jack's face. The message read, Who filmed this? I followed up with a note saying I had picked up the CD, and maybe I'd find out once I watched it. John checked on her again and said, Marcy's in a bad way. I don't know what you sent, but she threw up all over the living room carpet. By 5 a.m., John had sent out the message I'd written the day before to all of our contacts, friends, and enemies alike. The message read, This is what I showed Jace Redding when he asked why I had to leave. The second video, filmed in the same room as the bedroom, had been recorded with someone else's help. Neighbors openly said Jack Redding was Marcy's second husband. Marcy had even told them I agreed to this arrangement. That was a lie. A lie I'd only found out yesterday and planned to file for divorce and sue Jack. It wasn't a good start to the day for most people. I pulled into a truck stop just outside of town, ordered a trucker's breakfast, and sat down to eat from my booth. I could see my truck parked outside. "I'm sorry, Heath. No man deserves what you went through," said Maureen, Marcy's younger sister. "Mind if I join you?" I nodded, and Maureen sat down across from me as I sipped my hot coffee slowly. Mom and Dad filled me in last night. The girls told them everything once they got home. "We were all shocked," Maureen explained. "Just so you know, if you change your phone number, please let us know so we don't give it to Marcy by mistake." "The number will stay the same, Maureen," I replied. I was planning to quit my job in a couple of months anyway, so I could be home in the evenings as my girls start their teenage years. What was my sister thinking? Maureen burst out. "There's no way you'd ever agree to Marcy having a second husband." "We may never know," I responded. "Maybe it started as a friendship, but it ended up crossing a line. From what I gather, it's been going on longer than the 3 years we've heard." "What do you mean?" Maureen asked. "When I told Jace Redding why I was leaving, he mentioned rumors about his youngest son being involved with a married woman for years. He even asked if Linda and Lauren were Jack's." "Oh God, who else knows?" she asked, her face full of concern. I opened up Marcy's text messages and showed her what I had sent the night before and again that morning. After reading them, Maureen wiped tears from her eyes. What she thought was bad had turned out to be even worse. "Based on the video, there may have been a third person involved in their relationship," I said. "By the end of the day, everyone will know. Jace is likely going to make this public, searching for the truth. It could turn out that both kids are mine, or Jack's, or possibly neither of us." I paused, reflecting. Now I'm wondering if the person who shot the video was a man or a woman. Maureen noticed the tears in my eyes and stood up, taking my hand. We didn't say a word until the waitress came to take our order, and I eventually let go of Maureen's hand to eat. Heath and Marcy had married at 19. She was the youngest bridesmaid, and even back then, she was in love with him. To her, Heath was handsome and admirable, and even now she felt the same. Heath worked as a long-distance trucker to support her while she pursued her university degree. When she graduated, she had multiple job offers, but she chose the one in her hometown. Maureen realized it was because of Jack, her first love, whom their parents had never approved of. Maureen observed Heath closely, sensing he couldn't fully process everything yet. Still, whenever Heath was home, he dedicated much of his free time to the family. Maureen had always admired Heath. He was honest, treated her as an equal, and had always been there when she needed advice. Heath had a way of turning big problems into manageable ones, and it wasn't hard for Maureen to fall in love with him. Every man she'd met since then had fallen short of the standard Heath had set. Though her parents urged her to marry, Maureen couldn't tell them she had always loved Heath. He was loyal and never looked at another woman. But now she was determined to find a way to keep him in her life. When the time was right, she would show him he had married the wrong sister. "Heath, have you figured out where you're going to live?" Maureen asked, breaking the silence. Linda and Lauren asked Mom and Dad to take them in. "They're angry and upset, but they're proud of me," Maureen continued. "The girls told our parents they would tell the court they want to live with you. Mom and Dad have explained that you're doing the right thing for the long term. I can bring them to see you on weekends if you'd like." I opened my notes and handed her the farm's address. "My father and I are building a bar and store next to the place. I'll be staying with the tenant on the farm we own. I'll check with them, but we're also building a 2-bedroom apartment where I'll live." "Why there?" Maureen asked, curious. "We have 10 acres on either side of the intersection. After we develop it, we'll subdivide it into 3/4-acre lots. There's nothing nearby, so the store will be a convenient attraction." "How did you find it?" she asked. "I was driving across the country to save time," I explained. "Traffic was bad, so I noticed a 4-way stop and followed it. The area has enough traffic to support a business." After we finished eating, I picked up the check. Maureen leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, as she always did, making me smile. "Don't forget, Heath," Maureen said. "A lot of us have always loved you for who you are." While driving, I called my dad and told him everything. He promised to find me a top divorce lawyer. I tracked the 75-mile drive and arrived at the construction site just after 8:30. I smiled, knowing my dad was building a big project: 8 pumps for cars and small trucks, and 2 for large trucks. The pits were dug and blocks for the leak system were already in place. Construction on the floor and concrete for steel supports had also started. I walked into the trailer and saw the project, which was similar to others except for the 24-square-foot apartment on top. A sign my dad saw the neighborhood's potential. 2 hours later, I left for the farm where Bill Robinson greeted me. He admired my restored Ford truck, recalling the days when weight and solid metal were key. "Mrs. is serving lunch, and I was told to stop by," Bill said. His wife, Betty, made a farmer's lunch, and she was thrilled by how much I ate. I helped clean up, and she noticed I wasn't wearing my wedding ring. By the time we finished, she had coffee ready. I spent the next 2 hours telling them about the last couple of days. Bill mentioned that the girls and their aunt would be welcome to stay, saying, "It'd be nice to have young folks around again." Later, I wrote to Maureen, telling her she could visit every Friday night. She replied, "It's a date." Thursday afternoon, I reviewed a video on my laptop, but no faces appeared. Using my phone, I sent everything, including Miss Connor's contact info, to my dad. I asked him to have Jack served and told him Marcy could be served at the social services office. Out of spite, I even sent a video from the disc and texted Marcy. The other women did better in the video. Nothing special here. Maureen, a tax major, laughed as the girls texted their dad every 10 to 15 minutes. The 75-mile drive flew by. Once at the site, they sent one final message before seeing him waiting at the driveway. Linda and Lauren jumped out and ran into my arms. Bill introduced Betty to everyone, and the girls loved the room she prepared for them. Bill showed them around while Betty finished cooking. After dinner, I cleaned up with the girls, and Betty washed as we washed the dishes. Bill told the girls about the swings, the swimming pond, and bikes they could try. I was worried about how they'd spend their time, but Bill and Betty had it all figured out. After the kids went to bed, Maureen and I talked. "Heath, these past few days have been wild. Jack was someone Marcy secretly dated when we were young. They've been involved that long." "That makes sense," I said. I was the safe choice. Jack had a wild side Marcy loved, but he took advantage of it. He left her with a mesh she didn't deserve. "Mom and Dad spoke to Child Services," Maureen said. "If you sign permission, they can keep the girls until you find a place." They also interviewed the kids and concluded Marcy couldn't qualify for foster care due to her lifestyle. Maureen noticed I was crying, but I told her to leave. She stayed anyway. Marcy sat at the kitchen table, reflecting. Thursday was quiet, but today was different. Jace Redding came to see her at work, demanding a DNA test to confirm if he was the father of her daughters. It had been so long since they were conceived that her memory was fuzzy. Heath had warned her about the upcoming legal battle, but she dismissed it as anger. What caught her off guard was the message he sent to their friends and family. She never saw Jack as a second husband, but her lawyer explained that their common-law marriage gave him the same rights. Heath's lawsuit against Jack was likely to succeed. The only question was how much he would win. The lawyer explained that Heath would likely get favorable treatment in court due to years of being wronged. If Marcy had proof of collecting rent for 3 years, things might be different, but there was no evidence Jack contributed to household expenses, making him appear as a kept man. The real shock came at the end of the day when Marcy's supervisor called her in. "Marcy," her supervisor began. "Last Thursday after hours, you visited Mr. and Mrs. Klaus Rubenstein to discuss a custody matter. They were seeking advice on what to do with the kids. I told them that, without involvement from the father, we could allow them to act as temporary guardians. I know they're your parents. The supervisor continued. I can't fire you, but I'll transfer you as soon as possible. You'll be reassigned to an office job because your credibility here is gone. Marcy sat in silence, realizing her choices had led to this downfall. Everything was unraveling, and the consequences were worse than she expected. Saturday was busy. Linda and Lauren were eager for adventure. It was fun watching Bill teach them to ride the little bikes, and within 2 hours, they were zipping around. Bill finally called it a day, warning them they'd feel sore tomorrow. Seeing they were sweating, he suggested a dip in the pond. Meanwhile, Betty and Maureen started prepping dinner with a few girls helping in the kitchen. They worked on onions and potatoes while Bill and I fired up the grill for steaks. We enjoyed the meal outdoors at the picnic table, completely disconnected from phones and TV. The twins, exhausted from the day, went to bed early while the rest of us played cards and drank beer into the evening. Sunday afternoon, Maureen drove the girls home. I had already prepared a certified letter signed by Bill and Betty granting them temporary guardianship. Monday morning, Klaus Rubenstein called to thank me, having delivered the letter to the office, which then confirmed their legal guardianship. We dug deeper into Marcy and Jack's history, and I learned a lot. That Friday, Jack was served divorce papers while picking up medical equipment in Austin, Texas. Marcy was served that same morning at the social services office. Maureen texted me, asking for my waist size so we could swim with the kids. I responded, 34 inches. Later, while on an evening walk, I got a message from Marcy. You've calmed down enough to talk, she said. I replied, there's nothing left to say. Maureen told me everything, from your secret meetings with Jack to now. I still wonder if he was always the one. Why did you marry me? Unsurprisingly, she didn't respond. When Maureen arrived with the kids, excitement filled the air. Maureen looked stunning, and her smile was contagious. As the girls hugged me, they asked quietly if they could call Bill and Betty grandparents. I told them yes, as long as they were okay with it. As the kids ran off to greet Bill and Betty, Maureen kissed me unexpectedly. I smiled and told her to listen to the girls. We turned toward them, and Lauren asked, "Can we call you grandparents?" Linda added, "Is that okay?" Bill and Betty were thrilled, and Betty's tears flowed. We later learned she and Bill couldn't have children, and hearing my daughters call them grandparents was something she thought she'd never experience. After dinner, I told Maureen that both Marcy and Jack had been officially served. I showed her Marcy's last message and my response. "You know my sister can't admit her actions," Maureen said quietly. "She'd have to face the truth about herself." "Enough about her," I said. "When are you going to find a man who loves you the way you deserve?" Maureen smiled. "I've already found him, but getting him to realize it is the challenge." The next morning, Bill and I were up early, enjoying coffee outside. "Heath," Bill began, "Betty is my second wife. My first did to me what Marcy did to you." I was surprised. "Why tell me this?" "Don't let your anger blind you to what's right in front of you," he said. "Maureen's been by your side all along. When you're ready, ask yourself why." I started to understand. Could Maureen want more than friendship? "Bill, how did you know Betty was interested in you?" I asked. He chuckled. "A cast iron skillet. She caught a girl flirting with me and didn't like it. We didn't have kids, so we fostered children for a while." Our conversation ended as the family woke up. The twins spent hours on the motorcycles before Bill called for a break. "Enough, girls, take a swim in the pond." Betty and Maureen brought out chairs, and we watched as the girls played with a beach ball in the water. Later, as we headed inside, Betty grinned at Maureen. "Things are working out the way you hoped." Maureen blushed. "Not yet, but I'm working on it," she replied with a wink. Bill laughed, telling the twins the story of how he and Betty met. After dinner, the twins went to bed early, worn out from the day. I relaxed on the porch swing when Maureen joined me. Without a word, I put my arm around her, and she leaned in. "Mom figured it out," Maureen said softly. "Figured what out?" I asked. That I'm happier than I've been in years. I couldn't hide it when I took the twins home. How did she take it? She asked if something was happening between us, Maureen said. I told her not yet, but then she asked how long I've been in love with you. How long? Since the summer you married Marcy, she admitted quietly. That long? I was shocked, and I never noticed. I expected a lecture, Maureen said. But instead, she said if it works out, she'll get Dad on board. I smiled. Seems like your mom's rooting for you. Maureen laughed. She's thankful her sister threw my dad out every day. On Sunday, I kissed Maureen goodbye. As I was leaving, Lauren and Linda whispered, and then Lauren spoke up. Dad, Aunt Maureen has loved you for years, she said. Linda added, it took what Mom did for you to realize it. I was stunned by their insight. As Maureen drove away, I stood there thinking about their words. Bill came up beside me. Let's take a walk, he said. We crossed a small bridge to a beautiful piece of land. Bill gestured toward it. This would be the perfect spot for a house. Lauren and Linda could come whenever they wanted, maybe even ride horses. I raised an eyebrow. Whose idea was that? Betty's and Maureen's. Bill chuckled. They'll pitch it to you next week on Linda and Lauren. Klaus was shocked when I explained the paternity issue. He had assumed Marcy had just been with Jack for the past 3 years. Jace, enraged after learning the truth, confronted his daughter at social services, telling her, as far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me. Later, my mother-in-law informed me that Miss Connors had given a notarized statement for my attorney and that Jack would be back in town on Wednesday. She suggested I stay with them, but I decided to stay with John Zexsmith instead. Bill offered me his car to stay incognito, and I lent him my truck for the day. Tuesday evening, I arrived at John's house, and he handed me binoculars, revealing that Jack's older brother had been regularly visiting Marcy's house. I then called Jace and asked him to come over, telling him he needed to see something. When he arrived, I gave him the key to my house and told him to check the 3rd floor. Moments later, we heard fire. John and I immediately called emergency. When the police arrived, we watched as Jack was led away in handcuffs, and Jace was carried out on a stretcher, having been shot in the shoulder. Jack had fired, mistaking Jace for a burglar. The scene was surreal. Marcy, now fully dressed, was taken away in handcuffs, her face pale with shame. John shook his head in disbelief. Can you believe she was involved with both brothers? I sighed. I knew there was someone else, but not this. John added, Jace didn't deserve this. None of them did. By the end of the night, Jace was in an ambulance, and Jack faced attempted manslaughter charges. I was left torn between satisfaction and sorrow. The next morning, I visited Klaus, who was already on his porch with coffee. This whole situation with Jace and Jack is more than I expected, he said. I agreed, filling him in on the details, and his wife Rosa joined us, equally shocked. Later, I picked up Linda and Lauren from school. They were happy to see me but sensed something was wrong. We spent the afternoon with Klaus and Rosa, trying to keep things as normal as possible for the girls. That Wednesday, Jack returned to town, and as expected, things quickly escalated. I called John, asking him to keep an eye on my house since I knew Jack's temper could flare up easily. John agreed, and I braced myself for whatever might happen. Maureen had just finished her workday when her secretary entered her office with a strange look on her face. There's a man here with a dozen red roses, the secretary said. He's asking if you're free for dinner. Maureen looked puzzled, unsure who it could be. But when she walked out and saw me standing there, her expression softened and tears welled up in her eyes. In that moment, we both knew that everything between us was about to change. We went to dinner at Outback Steakhouse. Over blooming onion and cocktails, we talked about the kids, the chaos of the past few months, and what the future might look like. The conversation was light, but an unspoken understanding lingered between us. Something was shifting. As we finished dinner, John called with the news I had been dreading. Jack had arrived home before Marcy and was waiting for her. He had been drinking, and his temper quickly escalated. His father was in the hospital, his brother was in jail, and he had just lost his job. In his mind, it was all Marcy's fault. He was waiting with a weapon when she came through the door. The neighbor heard the gunshots and called the police. Marcy was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The news hit me hard, and I told Maureen, who immediately called her parents. We rushed to the hospital, but 6 hours later we were told that Marcy had died on the operating table. The internal bleeding was too severe, and the doctors couldn't save her. Breaking the news to Linda and Lauren was the hardest thing I've ever done. Klaus and I agreed to keep the casket closed for the funeral. The girls were heartbroken, and it was clear how much the loss weighed on them. As we stood watching the burial, Klaus pulled me aside. "Heath, there is no relationship between Jace Redding and the girls," he said gently. "But more importantly, how long has Maureen been in love with you?" I was caught off guard. "According to your wife, since the summer Marcy and I got married," I replied. Klaus smiled softly. "Did she also tell you her sister left me over 35 years ago? I'm grateful for that every single day. If things work out with you and Maureen, you have my full support." It was at that moment that I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't the end of my life, but the beginning of something new. The weight of the past still lingered, but I felt lighter, knowing there was a future worth rebuilding. 5 years have passed since then. I watch Linda and Lauren wait for the bus every morning, their faces bright and full of life. Maureen, now my wife, is busy with our 2 preschoolers. Bill and Betty have become their honorary grandparents, and the gas station and store Bill and I built have become the heart of our little village. The business flourished, and we even got our own post office. On warm days, I walk to work from the house we built by the pond. Jace Redding and his wife often visit. His oldest son's ex-wife lives in the village with their kids, and they've become part of our extended family. Jack was sentenced to 10 to 25 years for involuntary manslaughter. Jason eventually had his sentence reduced to a misdemeanor. Although the scars remain, life has moved on. As for the name of our village, it came from a sign Bill made that read, "We're all here because of circumstances," which he posted at the 4 corners of the intersection where the town began. The name stuck, and that's how our little village was born, out of the wreckage of the past, but filled with hope for what lies ahead. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.